Okay, so Florence has joined us, has joined us from Germany. And I should say that we do have books available to buy as bundles. Some of you have pre-ordered them. Some of you online can pre-order them. Feel free, if you want to pick up the books on your way out, please do. And I will say up front that we haven't included Florence's book in the bundle because it's in German and we didn't want to presuppose that you all spoke German. But she's going to wave it around. Right, we should now be live. So I want to welcome everybody that's joined us online. I'm Anne Franke. I'm the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute. And this is, we're hosting this event this evening. We're your hosts this evening. And I'm really delighted to welcome all of you. This event is a collaborative endeavor. It is an endeavor of the Procter Gamble Alumni Association, both the UK chapter and the Women's Leadership Forum, which is a global group of women. I'm the representative on the global board for Europe. And we want to always advance gender balance, gender equity, and women in leadership. And so we do events that promote that. I should say that my fellow panelists are all Procter & Gamble alumni. Florence, I worked with her in Germany. Sophie, who was in the UK and is the Chief Executive of the Marketing Society and also a CMI companion. And Helen, who is also a P&G alumni and a CMI and Marketing Society member. And the genesis for this event came about because, you know, we were talking about how you consume information, and I'm a compulsive reader of articles and Googler, and, you know, I'm always reading stuff online. Not all of it, you know, from the most trustworthy sources, but that's another story. But I read an article in Forbes, and I was shocked because it said, in 2020, there were more best-selling business books written by men called John than there were by women. And that got us thinking, and we thought, you know, we really ought to do something about that. And the thing about us that unites us, all of the panel tonight, is we have a couple of things in common. We're all P&G alumni, and we're all authors. And of course, we're all women. And so we thought, wouldn't it be a good idea in the month of International Women's Day to just showcase that so that we actually hear different voices. And this isn't to say that men don't write good business books. Of course they do. And many of the most famous, in fact, probably almost all of the most famous, might well be written by men, and that's absolutely fine. But increasingly, women are finding their voices in leadership and their voices in shaping how you manage and lead. And these voices should be heard. So this is the inspiration for tonight's event. And so you're all welcome. And again, as I said to the guests in the room, I say to the guests online, if you wish to buy any of the books, you may buy them. It's in the Eventbrite link that you have. And for those in the room tonight, of course, you can sign up and get them here. So I want to, of course, showcase these books because I'm going to now give each author their book to hold. We'll start with Sophie. Then we're moving to Helen. This is mine. And there is one more. She's not here, but she is a P&G alumni author, Jill Whitty-Collins. I used to work with Jill in the UK, and she's written Why Men Win at Work, which you can also buy. It is in the bundle. So I'm just showcasing these books because that was the whole genesis of why we did this event. But now I'm going to ask my fellow panelists, or I should say my co-panelists, to do what you just did. And of course I'm going to time them. They are, rather than me introduce them, I'm going to let them tell you their life story. And, you know, they're not going to get any more time than you did. And I am going to start with the wonderful Helen.
Okay, the 6-second version. Wild child to work geek but I might take the 60 seconds, I've got them. So wild child, pretty naughty at school, didn't do particularly well until I discovered business. Business studies, did really well at that. Business studies at A-level, business at university, got a first in that, and then later kind of an MBA. I basically discovered business, and I found something I was good at. So moving on from kind of studying business to like doing business, I went into lots of businesses, and I realised that doing good at business when you're in a company meant getting promoted. So going to these big companies, big shiny companies, Procter Gamble, Virgin, Microsoft, and go do good work, which meant getting promoted. And then I realised that actually getting promoted might look good on the surface, but didn't necessarily make you happy, and it wasn't always the way that you made the biggest impact. So I started to realise that squiggling in my career, like sideways moves, starting side projects, doing different things than other people expected you to do, was more interesting and enjoyable, and that has taken me to here, writing a book, running a company, having a podcast. That was tight.
Bravo, well done. I did have to flash her at 60 seconds. It's fine. She has many more interesting things to reveal, and I'm sure they'll come out in our discussion. And now I set the timer to 0 again. I'm going to go to Sophie.
Okay. So my life story, I'm actually going to talk about a love story. So post P&G is the only bit of a life story you're going to get. It's a story of accidents and love. So I accidentally stumbled into marketing and working at Procter Gamble, but as soon as I arrived, I fell so ridiculously in love with business, with how interesting it is, with marketing and brand management and the magic and logic and the art and science of it all, and with the person who is now my husband, which was incredibly inconvenient because we did a bit of A/B testing. He was at P&G too, and he didn't love it as much as I loved it. So he knew he wanted to go and do something different. And that ended up with us having a very squiggly career. So I have lived in London, in Tallinn, Estonia, in the UAE, and in Istanbul. I have worked with big corporates like Procter Gamble and Coca-Cola. I've worked agency side and consultancy side, and I've set up and run my own e-commerce business. And all that meant that I could talk about leadership with my book super fast.
Wow, it's hard to do this in a minute. Again, you'll hear many more interesting and fascinating facts and insights from Sophie in our discussion. And now, Florence, over to you.
She gets a restart.
She gets a restart. Wait, you're on mute again. Can you say something?
Yeah.
There you go.
She's got pictures.
Okay, you've got pictures, you get a prize. Go.
So this is me with 5 older siblings born in Germany. This is me a little bit later with my family, 3 children. I worked as the others at P&G, at Milita, which you might know, German company, at Estée Lauder, at Heineken, and Heineken was, if you want, so Global Senior Director, Consumer and Market Intelligence. After that, driven by my curiosity for human behavior, I founded Ambition Lives, from purpose to action, that's the idea. I became a certified coach. I discovered the courage zone, which is a very important zone to shape your life, and I wrote a book. Courageously on.
Oh, and she gets the prize because she came in at 58 seconds. And your book, Mutig weiter, because I do speak German, translates in English as
move on with courage. One moment where English is longer than German. That's incredible.
Okay, so I suppose I have to do this too. I'm going to time myself. So I was born in New Jersey in the US, so a Jersey girl. Grew up in a very small, very homogeneous town, which really made me quite restless. So the moment I could, I broke out of it. I moved to California, I moved to New York, and then I went to the Soviet Union and Germany and decided that I really wanted to study languages and live and work in Europe. And I wasn't going to wait for some company to transfer me there, so I just thought, oh, I'll get a job in Germany, why not? And I got a job in Procter Gamble, and I had a fabulous time. I spent 14 years there, and I thought, wow, you know, this business stuff is really quite fun, because I also had a degree in journalism, and I didn't make any money as a journalist, so I thought, oh, I'll go join P&G. Loved it. Then I had the middle of my career. I had 3 very bumpy C-suite stints as the first and only female, and that made me very uncomfortable and really challenged my values. And then I found, at the end of my career, the wonderful job of CEO of CMI, which I love. And what a lot of women have told me is, yep, I understand. It's the old shit sandwich. Anyway, so that's our life stories. Now, we're going to go into the panel discussion. And I only have 3 questions, because these people are so articulate, and we're going to have a conversation. But the first dwells on some of our commonalities. So we are all Procter Gamble alumni. And it shaped us. And it shaped, I'm sure, why and how and what we put in our books. And I'd love each of us to share how that shaped what we wrote, why we wrote it, how we wrote it. And this time, I'm going to start with Sophie.
So there were probably 3 different things that Procter & Gamble gave me that contributed to my writing of Superfast. One is practical, the other is philosophical, and the third one is probably just personal. So the practical side of it all is I started out at P&G, and as I said, I stumbled into it, and I met some amazing people when I went for interview practice. And the way in which they talked about work and loving work and caring about it made me join the company in the first place. And what I then saw in my first few years at Procter & Gamble was that it is entirely possible to do well and do good. That businesses have to be commercial, they have to be successful, but that the people leading them can have integrity, can be decent people. And that fundamental foundations and that belief for me that it's entirely possible to operate with velocity, speed in the right direction, and be both purposeful and successful, meant that the rest of my career I have continued to look for good leaders who want to do great things and support them with what they're doing. It's very practical as well in that one of the things I did for Superfast is to base it on the stories of 100 different pace setters across the world. So people who were incredibly successful in their own fields, telling their stories to understand what they did to be great pace setting leaders. And that started with a number of people I already knew from P&G. So the beautiful thing about that was it was a ready-made network of great people who've ended up staying my good friends, and people like Paul Polman, who was one of the first interviewees. He spoke for hours about the concept of how do we lead at speed, which was a great connection from Procter & Gamble, or people like Gary Coombe, who's still at P&G and is the global CEO of Gillette. They gave me some very practical tips for the book. I guess the last one is just the personal one, which is starting out in a career where you're very early on in your career, given a lot of responsibility, makes you confident, but also where an organisation where you are forced pretty much from day one to be precise, to be concise in your thinking. So the one-page memo, which everybody is taught at P&G, and the ability to edit your thinking is incredibly important as a principle for operating in a super fast world, and has stayed with me.
Yeah, I think that is great, that one-page memo. And the other thing that you had to do is you had to start with, you know, what you're recommending, right? Because a lot of companies, you write 25 pages about the background and the options and this, and then, you know, in the last page 32, by the time you're asleep, it's, oh, and here's what we want to do. And P&G flipped that on its head, right? So it's concise.
And I would also say, writing a book's really hard. I mean, it honestly is one of the most incredibly hard things you do, but it's nothing compared to editing a book.
Yes.
So same with writing any kind of proposal, right? Learning how to curate and focus and prioritize is invaluable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Florence, what about you?
Yeah, there were really a few key moments where bosses had the courage to trust in me. And that were very special moments, and they are part of the book. Part of the book is really how do you encourage others to grow? And that was for me always a principle at P&G. How do you make people grow? And that you lean forward as a leader with the people in your teams. So that's one. The second one is really wonderful interviews with ex-colleagues Benodora, who was CEO from Clerks, Oliver Castaglio is now boss of WMF. With you, Anne, around the question of women progressing in companies. So I had a beautiful network to work with to create my content and my anecdotes. Anecdotes. And of course, the principle that I really believe that great companies with a lot of courageous leadership are built on a few elements that allow everybody to shine and to perform. Questions like purpose, strategy, principles. And I believe they really nurture courage because you have a clear base for acting in the company. And it's a huge content in my book.
Well, courage is important, and courage means you have to take risks, and it also maybe means sometimes you don't succeed, but you learn from it, and we'll no doubt circle back to that. Helen, what about you?
Okay, so on the topic of courage, my story is a little bit different. P&G felt like my first big failure, because I was there for a year. So this amazing company, super shine on the surface, really hard to get into. I got there and I was like, oh, I'm not sure if this is what I want to do. And I was doing quite well. Like on the surface, people would have thought, oh, she's doing really well. But I just wasn't quite happy. And I ultimately decided to leave and kind of find my way to what did make me happy. But in the link between that experience and the book, what I realised was that I didn't have conversations with anybody about how I was feeling. I didn't have the confidence to. In fact, it wasn't just confidence. I didn't have the ability to articulate what I was feeling. Like, I didn't know what my values were. I didn't know what I wanted to be known for. I didn't have a community around my career. So I was this ambitious individual who felt like they'd make the wrong decision when everybody else thought it was the right one. And I sort of took myself out of it. And so it felt like a failure. I remember my mum being like, what are you doing? You're ruining your career. And I was like, thanks, Mum. Great way to go. But I stuck with it because I just stuck with it, and I found myself in the opportunity. But if you had given that Helen the stuff that we cover in Squiggly Career, I would have stayed longer, because I would have talked to other people and I would have been more confident to articulate my values and what I wanted to be known for, and I probably could have navigated myself into a different opportunity. And so it's a really funny thing for me to sort of identify as alumni, because I was like, oh, but I don't feel like I am. But it was a failure that informed my success, if that makes sense, in the journey that I was on.
That makes perfect sense. And you know, my story is a little bit the opposite, because when I started at P&G, as I said, I had a very successful career, and I was running the UK cosmetics and skincare business in the mid-90s. I know that's a long time ago. Many of you probably weren't born, but it's fine. And I was going through a tough time. I was going through a divorce. And I needed to take my daughter to school. She was a young child, 3 or 4 years old, just starting school, really. And it was just non-negotiable. And I went to the then general manager of the UK, my boss, because I had just been promoted. And I said to him, you know, I'm going through a divorce, and I have to take my daughter to school, and I'm going to come to your meeting every day, not at 9 when it starts, because he had a daily 9 o'clock meeting with his reports, but at 9:30. Because I can't make it at 9. This was the mid-90s, and he looked at me, he said, that's fine, no problem, do it. And I was so relieved. And I did it, and the first few times I was red-faced. Oh God, late again, you know, walking in, your colleagues are all there, mid-sentence, and you're like shuffling in. But then, people got used to it, and it was fine. And I thought, wow, he's been great, I'm gonna pay this forward. And I had about 15 direct reports. And I said, they weren't divorced single mothers like I was. They were younger, and they had different interests. One played the violin in an orchestra, one was on a netball team, another just liked to go clubbing. And I let them do what their thing was. And the clubbing guy, he'd come in at 11 and stay till late, fine. You know, the orchestra guy would come in at 7 and leave at 4, fine. The netball lady, she left a couple days a week early to go to her netball. I didn't care, because, you know, it was about their results. So that I let them fit their work around their life, because I had been given that privilege. And I got a call from Cincinnati, the head of P&G HR at that time, Charlotte Otto. And she said to me, oh, Anne, you know, this is quite interesting. I want to ask you some questions. You have the most gender-balanced cosmetics and skincare team anywhere. And you also have the highest shares and margins. And I thought, wow. And ever since then, I've been absolutely convinced that gender balance and flexible working and letting people fit their work around their lives is absolutely essential. That is the opening chapter of the book. And like my colleagues, that really informed how I thought. And when I left P&G, I realized that really wasn't true. It's something that I'm very, very, very passionate about. And it made me, from a personal level, as well as the professional level, a real advocate for this topic and for gender balance. So that's my story. But there is another, of course, thing that does bind us all together besides P&G, and that's that we're female authors. And I shared that stat with you about more men named John writing business books. What do we think? I'd like to ask my panelists, what do we think about women's voices, the state of where women are in leadership? How do we get our business information, the thing that you loved and the thing that you loved, and the thing that gave you courage? How do we get more diverse voices? How do we get those heard in leadership, in business? And this time I'm going to start with Helen.
Okay. I think that two things. I think we have to give women confidence in their work and their words. So when I talk to people, and it isn't just women, I think when we have these 5 skills in the Squiggly Career, and one of them is confidence, and I think it's like the anchor for everything, because if you haven't got self-belief, you're not sort of brave enough to put all the self-awareness stuff into action. And I see it coming up as a doubt that gets in the way of people's development all the time, like the I'm not good enough, or Sophie's got more expertise than me, therefore I shouldn't, I'm not going to be as good. All this like stories we tell ourselves. So I think we have to give positive feedback, help people to see their strengths, give women confidence in their work. And then I think we have to create confidence in specifically their words. When we're talking about books, their words, encourage people to, it can just be an opinion on LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be a book to begin with. It could just be a post. It's okay to put your opinion out there, and then maybe it becomes an article on your intranet, and then maybe it becomes something you speak about at an event. But if we can sort of create that journey where women have more confidence in their words, and we give them we shine a spotlight on the things that they do well, so they've got confidence in their work, I think that helps. And then the other thing I think is really important is that people who've done that, like us, are generous and honest. And what I mean by that is be generous with our contacts. Who do we know? If you want to do something on LinkedIn, or you're you speak at that event, how did you get there? Okay, let me introduce you. Why don't you come with me to that event, and I'll introduce you to people there. Be generous, and then also be honest. So, for example, when Sarah's my co-founder, co-author, co-everything, and we have a joint bank account, we both have matching jewellery. I mean, it's kind of weird. There are lines, but they're very blurry. But the first time we decided to want to write a book was about 7 years ago. No one wanted to publish it. That's honest. We went round with this book, How to Have a Happy Career. Nobody wanted to publish it. And the reason we got our book published, because we were speaking at an event a bit like this, someone saw us, gave us the opportunity. And I think, to be really honest, that it is hard writing a book. It doesn't magically happen. That I haven't got an agent. There's just be honest about how we've got to what we've got to, and then it's a bit more transparent. There's no real magical formula for it. But Anne and me and Sophie and Florence, we might have done it differently, but let's just share that so you can decide what you want to do. So honesty, I think generosity, and give women specifically confidence in work and words.
And how did you get through your book? I'm sure we all have our little tips and tricks.
I guess one difference for me is that I had a co-author, and so this is just how it works, not how I'd advise it, but it's how it works with us. We divide up chapters. It's very boring, but we divide up the chapters. She reads what I read what she reads, we make changes. That can cause friction. So you have to, what we've learned, book 2, I've learned that you have to hold your ideas relatively lightly. Otherwise you're just I think that's a good sentence. Well, I don't think, and it doesn't go, it's not that helpful for the overall book. So we sort of edit each other, and then we've got really clear at what each other's good at. So I am good at pithy statements and models that stick. Sarah is good at quotes and eloquence and meaning. And so we kind of work out what each other are best at. She's also tenacious. So I get about 75% through and I go, that's good enough. And she's like, that is no way near good enough. And then she brings out this like portable whiteboard that she writes every chapter on. And then she has like a red, amber, green status. And it sits behind her in every Zoom meeting that I have with her for about 6 months. And I just let her do it because that's when her control kicks in. And I'm like, all good, you do that. And I'm
and are all your chapters in red and hers are in green?
I mean, the politics of this, we're still business partners, but we haven't been book 3 yet, so we'll see.
Okay, that's great insight. What about you, Sophie?
Well, you started out by talking about, why does this matter
and
why do we care? And I guess the most important thing in all this discussion is just a reminder that this conversation and the reason why this is an issue isn't just about women. So fundamentally, I do believe that equality is great for everyone. And not having a voice, not having enough of a voice that 52% of the population is represented when it comes to leadership conversations particularly, so it's leadership and business books, is a real issue. Because you're missing out on different perspectives, you're missing out on so much of talent that's out there. But I know it is a blocker for people because it's the classic, you can't be what you can't see. So if we're not seeing women in senior roles, we do tend to, whatever we logically know, we tend to feel there's a barrier there. And if we don't see women and we don't read women and we don't hear their voices in our ears in the Audible books, I mean, I listen to a lot of Audible books in the car and they're all male, mid-Atlantic, American, there's a certain voice. So trying to get more voices out there feels really, really important. And equality being good for everyone, I think, is a fundamental principle, and getting the talent out there and encouraging people. And there's so many interesting conversations with women who want to write books, who want to get their voices heard, and with men who do as well. And it's so satisfying to write a book, even though it's really, really hard. It's definitely like becoming a parent, writing a book. It's a brilliant, brilliant idea in theory. There's always some pleasure in the conception, but actually getting it out there is really quite painful. But I promise you, it's totally worth it. So do write more, do read more. I don't know if you've ever done if you follow Twitter, if you're on Twitter, have you ever done a gender check of the voices you're listening to? Podcast, books, have you ever looked at the balance? Because I realise how quickly I get into listening to the same type of person. More voices in the world is a better thing. And we have all got something to say, even though it's definitely hard getting a voice out there and finishing a book, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love your analogy about giving birth. I think that is so true. Now, I think we seem to be having, and this happens, some technical issues. I don't see Florence up there to ask. I'm sure that we're working on getting her back. But meanwhile, let me share my thoughts on this. So obviously, there are a lot of reasons why women are not reflected enough in leadership. And I think that we all have an opportunity and in some ways an obligation to do something about that. And diverse voices make better decisions. When you listen to a diverse group of people in the room that don't share your views, but you listen to those views and you take them into account, there is research that says you're going to make a better decision. And I think the same is true of the voices that we listen to and look to to help us navigate our personal lives and our careers. And I think it's so important that we have diverse voices and women's voices in that. And, for me, therefore, writing the book from a professional standpoint, as the chief executive of CMI, it was very easy because when you have gender balance, just like that phone call I got all those years ago at P&G, you get better business results. And there's a lot of evidence that demonstrates that. And so we really do need to hear from those female voices and those female leaders, and we do need to speak up. The other thing that I think is very, very important that is often overlooked is, and this gets a little bit at the confidence point that Helen was making, but it's about not just hiring in women who are more than 50% of university graduates now into the bottom quartile of organizations, but it's the promotion. So really what I like to think about is we need to promote proportionately, because if you promote proportionately, if you have 50% in the bottom quartile and you promote half the women, you know, assuming the talent is equally distributed, you promote the same percentage of women as men, you're going to have 50-50 in the second quartile. And if you do that again in the third, you're going to have 50-50 in the third quartile. And then if you keep doing that, you're going to get to 50-50 at the top. And so this isn't rocket science. This is all discoverable. There are all things that we can do to make sure that those leadership voices are at the table. Now, when it comes to my book, and I'm going to be like, I suppose I'm going to be the resident swear person. So I had a book bitch. So what I did is I just plotted out my diary, and I got somebody in my team to be the nag, like, you know, oh, you're supposed to be on chapter 5. Are you on chapter 5? Oh, you're not on chapter. Oh, you know. So, and I just plotted it out, and I just put it in my diary, like, you know, you will write today. And I would go to the dining room table in the morning, and I'd say, right, I'm going to write this chapter, whether it kills me or not. And I would just bash it out. Often, like, full of typos. I mean, thank God I didn't have Sarah there, because she would have had a fit, because a lot of it was probably gibberish. But I would just get it out, just get it on the page, right? And then at the end of the day, I'd be like, ooh, I finished that chapter. Of course, I had all my research and interviews lined up, and I'd be like, ooh, I finished that chapter. And a lot of it didn't make sense. It looks like we're trying to get Florence back. So then I would have this same friend, and you know, the person, my colleague, would take what I had written and use modern technology to check it all and make sense of the stuff I had bashed out. And if she didn't understand something, she'd say, I'm not sure this makes sense. But so we did work as a team. And it was very satisfying. And I was doing this while I had a full-time job. I was the CEO of CMI, and I was doing this in my spare time and in my weekends and my Christmas holidays. And it is very rewarding, even if, you know, and I'll be the first to say my book is not a bestseller. I mean, I think Helen's is, and well done to her, and others are. But it doesn't matter, because it's still, like Sophie said, it's a labor of love. It makes you proud, and you realize, again, you can do this, and you have something to say. And again, like Sophie and like Helen, I relied on a lot of wonderful colleagues to add their voices to the book. And, you know, of course, making sure that you incorporate different perspectives, also male perspectives, is very important. And having male champions for women in business is incredibly important, because the sad truth is, if you have bad behavior toward women, and it happens a lot. Last night, somebody was telling me the story of, and these are corporate execs in a global corporation, I won't name it, of course. And there was a very female team, and one of the male senior execs said, oh, it's the Great British Bake Off team. I hope you all have your aprons. Anyway, when men call out sexist remarks from other men, the impact is greater than when women do. So to the lone man in the room, and there he is, let's give him a round of applause. And it's really important that, you know, men do call this out. And here she is, as if by magic, back to tell us how she thinks we're going to get more diverse voices and more female voices heard in leadership and in
thank you.
authorship.
Yeah, I followed it all. I didn't know that I was off for you, but I could listen to all of it. I did self-publishing because I wanted to be heard. So I decided, I knocked at a few doors. I got an agent who was super interested, but he didn't get a publishing house, so I did it myself. And I'm so very, very happy about it, because you can rule over the graphics, the content, the title, and the timing. Because if you go for a publishing house, it's not sure when you are in there, when you come up in their calendar. And I wanted to get it out. as you, it was teamwork. I got me an editor, I got me a graphic designer, and I had friends and very smart people reviewing. I have to say, I think Sophie said it, the worst is the editing. Writing is fine, and then the final dotting the I's and crossing the T's is not my preferred part of book writing. Beyond, I think, how to raise more and female voices, you can help me to publish it in English. I'm working on the translation. And if you have a publishing house, I'll be happy to hear. Beyond, I really ask for women in my work. I remember when I was with one company, I was leading the strategy work, and they submitted all their experts they wanted to bring to the big project. And I read through the bios, and they were all men. It was unbelievable. It was one of the big consultancy firms. And I said, I don't believe that this is the best panel of experts you can provide. It can't be, because they're all male. There was some embarrassment on the other side, and I got some wonderful female experts. So that's a little bit a banal example, perhaps, and I still think we have to ask for it. So we have a chance. And of course, we promote others. And I want to re-promote the book from Jill, because she helped me write mine, because I read it and I was so impressed, because I thought I had read everything about the topic, and I learned a lot. So kudos to her. And so far.
Great. And, self-publishing, again, that's another thing that you can all do today. We can all do this today, right? Mm-hmm. You do a podcast. How many millions of listeners do you have?
7 million. No, that's TED Talk. I think 3 million, I think.
Only 3 million. Only 3 million. There you go. Sophie.
I think it's what's really important. Just thinking about Helen's story earlier and the writing thing, this isn't to say to every single person out there you have to write a book, but to understand that actually speaking up, being able to have a conversation if you're not happy at work, if you think things should change, if you've got something to say, being confident in our own voices and the impact that has. So I don't tend to subscribe to that we should have more female leaders, we have more female writers because they are different. Just think there's a statistical basic thing of more voices, more diversity, more inclusion, more interest, more perspectives, and everything's better. So encouraging everyone to feel confident with speaking up, I think, is important. I think the other conversation I have with lots of people who want to write books, and particularly women, is the barrier and the blocker is this bit where you have to do the self-promoting piece. And women tend to be less comfortable with feeling like they are putting themselves out there, and self-promoting, relentlessly self-promoting is a real barrier for people. But if you care about what you have to say, and if you want to help other people, that gets you through it. My biggest blocker in writing the book was halfway through a massive, enormous wave of imposter syndrome, which was like, what the hell am I doing? Who am I? Does the world need this? And the thing that got me through was, first of all, reading the stats about how few women's books were out there, and I knew that just by publishing the book, I would be changing the stats. And then secondly, there was the reality that actually people often don't really read the book, and at least I would have published a book, and it's like starting your own business. You'll never not have done it. And so just trying to get to that end result and seeing the progress that are being made, it feels so good to be able to just get your voice out there and encourage other people to do it. So when you hear other people who have something to say, amplifying it, whether you're male, female, adding to the mix, we all have such good voices.
That's very, very true. And, encouraging people to speak up about their achievements. One of the pieces of advice I like to give people is keep an achievement log. Mm-hmm. Just keep a log of all your achievements. And then, when you're ready, go in, make an appointment with your boss, run through your achievements and say, I'd like to plot my path to promotion. Here's what I've done. What's my path? And, men from society and everywhere else, they're just more comfortable doing that, but women should do that. But we've talked a little bit about leadership, and one of the last questions before we're going to go to our interactive bit, where we're going to ask you what you think, is what do you think are the important leadership traits now? And do you think there's been any change or shift in those traits? What do you think? Let me maybe start with Helen.
Well, so I was at an event last week where I was told what they are. I'm not going to say something different. I was at this event about AI and how basically all our careers are doomed unless we are creative and curious and have empathy. So that's what the AI experts say. I'm going to say something different. I think that as leaders, we need to be sense makers and space makers for people. Let me explain what I mean. So I think there's just information everywhere, like articles and emails and social. There's just information everywhere, and I see it in my team that it's hard, like, what should I focus on first? What's a priority? I've got so much to do today. And I think actually what we can do as leaders is just like be sense makers. Like, what's the most important thing? Why is it important? How do we get, like, just creating sense for people is a really important, like, being the zoom out for people so they can kind of focus on what they need to get done, really useful. And then I think space creating is becoming really easy. Like, literally giving people space in their diary to think. Like, you know, if I look at my team's diary and there is no space in it whatsoever, I'm doing them a disservice, because they're like in delivery mode, right? Do, meeting, get stuff done. And like, we all need to do a bit of that. But if that's all we're doing, then when are we thinking, and when are we learning, and when are we reflecting? Because that's how stuff sticks, and that's how we get better, and that's how we go beyond where we are today. So I think of leaders, we're just like, have I helped someone make sense of what they're doing this week? And have I given someone more space than they had last week? I'm like, okay, if I've done that, then I think I've enabled them to do their job, which I think is the job of being a leader.
So there is Helen of the pithy slogan, personified, sense makers and space makers. Perfect. Florence, what about you? What's good leadership for you?
Yeah, building on that, I believe that you have more permission than ever, and you have to be much more conscious and open about your limits. I think the times of the superhero leader should be over, and I meet more and more leaders who know this is over, that you know everything, that you can do everything and so on, but that you are able, and that's part of the empathy that Helen mentioned, that you're empathetic to yourself, towards yourself, and you know where the limits are of what you can bear, what you can perform, what you know, and so on. Because I think another huge shift is that with a half time of knowledge being shorter and shorter, if you don't know how to facilitate smartness in your organization, you can't be a smart leader. You cannot make smart decisions from my point of view. So how do you facilitate the knowledge, nurture the people that are younger than you and know more, and you give them the space to contribute with their perspective, I think is an absolute key for future leaders.
I'm a fan of space and empathy. And Sophie, what about leadership? What's it to you?
I think the most important thing is to accept that leadership has changed. So 21st century leadership is so different. And it's why I wrote the book, and it's one of the things I'm particularly interested in. And that is because it is so exciting when things go fast, and it's a super fast world and all that's happening. But as a leader, we cannot scream if you want to go faster anymore. It's not like being on those fairground rides where you're just trying to get people to go faster. You have to structure to help get the speed. We cannot command and control, and most of us don't want to. So therefore we've got to trust and inspire. We can't tell people what to do. We have to storytell. And all that requires much more skill and thought from a leader. And when we know that everything is going to continue to change, whether it's with AI, whether it's with other technological, political trends, it's going to continue to change. So the way in which we lead people has to change too. And pace-setting leadership, so understanding when you need to slow down to think, to make space to think, to plan, to connect, to build relationships, but also being ready to respond so fast, the pressure to respond fast. We as leaders need to work out how to be both responsive. We have to make sure our businesses succeed. We cannot survive unless they succeed, but also responsible. Because now the decisions we're making as leaders will impact future generations, and they impact people, and that's a lot of focus for people at the moment. Responsive and responsible.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility for future generations. Well, at CMI we do a lot of research on this, and I could share some of the results. It's quite interesting. We asked people during the pandemic, what do you value in your leader at every level? Because, you know, you are a leader at every level. If you're a team leader, you're leading your team, you're a leader. If you're, you know, a group leader, you're leading a group, you're a leader. If you're the CEO, obviously you're a leader. So you are a leader at every level, and I think recognizing that is very important. So what did people say matters? And a lot of you have touched on those things. So the ability to communicate, absolutely essential. So, you know, you cannot hide out in your office and not talk to the people you're working with. You have to communicate with them. And communication isn't, I said this, now go do it. It's, let's have a conversation, and here's what I said. What did you hear? Because communication is what the other person hears, not what you say. Being collaborative, again, very important. So, you know, the world is too complicated to do it on your own, and the idea of, you know, the lone alpha superhero leader is just so wrong. So being collaborative, being compassionate, empathy and compassion, very, very important to people in terms of how they are managed and led. And also clarity. This is about, in a way, it's about what you were saying, Helen. It's about helping people to focus on what's important and giving them clarity, helping them understand that this is what's going to make the difference, or how does their work fit in with the overall purpose of the organization. And in the pandemic, what was great is that, as one chairman said to me, the employees went to the top of the stakeholder wheel. And suddenly all the CEOs and chairs were really concerned. And one CEO said to me, oh my God, you know, I've gotten to know my people so much better in the pandemic. Because I don't just waltz into the office and say a cursory, hi, how are you? I actually care. And I listen to their answers. And I actually ask them how they are. And I listen to their answers. And I really hope that those traits that were born out of the pandemic, and the employee centricity that was born out of the pandemic, and the empathy and the communication stay with us. And I'm constantly asking people, are you, going to restore factory settings, or are you going to go into the 21st century? And the good leaders all say to me, you know what, we're going to go into the 21st century. But we've shared what we think. Now it's time to ask you what you think. We have an interactive tool, which I hope is working, and it's a Slido tool. And I think what you have to do is scan a QR code, which is on your seats if you're in the audience. And how do the people at home join the Slido? Because we're going to create a word cloud. We're going to ask you that same question. What are the leadership traits that matter to you? And let me just check with my team. Can Amanda or Michael share for the people online, how do they participate? Is it in the Eventbrite or?
No, it's in the chat.
It's in the chat. Thank you so much. So our online audience, please check it out in the chat. And we're going to create a word cloud. We give everybody time to say what they think really matters, what leadership traits are going to make a difference. And then we're just going to see what you all come up with, because I'm sure you'll all have your own ideas, and perhaps some of them will be inspired by some of the ideas you've heard from our panelists. So we'll take the time to do that.
Lots of thinking faces of people in the room.
Yes. And then I think, if I'm right, when we have enough contributions from those online and those in the audience, this word cloud is going to magically appear. I think I'm right in that.
Okay, so we've got a slight technical hitch, so bear with us.
Oh.
So we're not actually going to have the word cloud up here, but we've got it on here. Colleagues with microphones, and they're going to read it out so you can listen to what's going on the word cloud there, and then we can talk about it.
Oh, okay. Well, can we take like a screenshot of the word cloud?
Or do you want the laptop with the word cloud?
Yeah, why don't you just pass me the whole kit and caboodle and I'll just, there you go. Very interesting. What makes a great leader?
There's a big juicy empathy in there.
Yeah, so the
Huge.
biggest thing in the middle there is empathy. And I think that that is a very modern leadership trait. And, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that word wouldn't be in this cloud. I think we can all agree that, but it really should be in the cloud. So what else is in here? Vulnerability. That's so important because leaders are not infallible. The ability to admit your mistakes is so important because that's how we learn. Helen admitted, she learned from what she considered her failure at P&G. And I learned from, the middle part of my career, which was quite bumpy, those C-suite roles. I considered that failure. I learned hugely. I learned how to be vulnerable and to learn and talk about that. Transparency, integrity, listener, authenticity, uplifting, fun, trust. Florence will like this. Courage, right? Mutig in German. That's an important one. Role model, candor, vision, listening, humanity, trust-giving, inclusive, engagement, clarity, humble, servant leader, leadership by example, resilience. It's also very important. Self-care is for everybody. As a leader, you have to take care of yourself, right? Space in the diary is part of that. Uplifting, caring, a communicator, create meaning. So actually, there seems to be supportive. So the biggest words are empathy, trust, supportive, listening, honesty, vulnerability, compassion. Those are kind of the biggest words.
I love the word thoughtful that's in there, though. The double meaning there of, making sure you make space to think about it, but being thoughtful about how you're interacting with other people is a good one.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to ask each of our panelists what they think about these words and what their reaction is to the words that you as our audience have suggested here, even though, alas, you can't see it. Well, you can, but it's quite small. So, Sophie, what resonates with you? I'll pass the word cloud to you.
Are you suggesting that my eyesight not
No, it's just I want you to be able to see up close.
I think it's incredibly hard to get it right, as we've talked about, for anybody in business and in a leadership role at the moment. But pretty close to empathy here in terms of size, the number of people who've looked at it, is the word listening. And we've just talked about voices, that creating psychological safety inside an organisation so that you can get the voices from people. It just feels really basic and so powerful to be able to have the different perspectives from people, to be able to know what's going on. I mean, if you work in marketing, understanding your audience is critical. Understanding your team is always so important. The Google Rework study, which talks about how it's not who's on your team that matters, but how the team works together, that comes from listening and empathy. So all these things are lovely, positive words, being present. They're all just about being very human. And I think that's really important. The only other one I would just point out is somebody who's talked about candor. So I talk a lot in Superfast about the accelerating power of truth and honesty, and radical candor as a philosophy, and understanding how powerfully helpful and constructive that could be. I think it's a really modern but also helpful trait. Do you want
the laptop? It's very retro, isn't it? Like holding a laptop. So I look at these words and half of me goes, well, that's a bit daunting. So I've got to wake up and be thoughtful, compassionate, caring, vulnerable, human, visible. Gosh, it's only like 7:30. So I look at that. But then the other part of me thinks, this is all just a choice, right? This is a choice. Like, I can choose to listen. I can choose to be empathetic. I can choose to be vulnerable and share my story. I can choose to support somebody else. And if I think about that, like, it's just a choice that we all make, right? You don't yes, you can invest in your listening skills and there are models and all that kind of stuff, but effectively, you can just choose to listen. It's like you can read a book on listening, or you can just choose to listen to somebody and stop talking and let them have their space and their moment. And so I just look at these words and think, well, what am I going to choose to do today that's going to mean I'm behaving more like this? And that I find a much easier way of approaching this than how can I be creative, inspirational, honest and authentic. Just what am I going to choose to do today that helps me to show up more like this is the easier way that I look at it.
I think that's a really important insight. You know, we all have a choice because all of these words are behaviors, right? So these are not things that you get PhDs in. They're behaviors, and so they are choices. Oh, no, I'm going to show it to Florence here. But thank you, Michael.
You cannot. I took notes. I will not stress the technical issues, but I can't see a thing.
Oh.
Because the camera's over there.
Doesn't matter. I wrote it.
Like, that was a really stupid thing I did. Just let me admit my, show vulnerability and admit my mistake. Like, there is no camera there. She's not here. How are we going to get Florence to be able to see this?
Screenshot.
No, it's okay. I wrote it down.
Oh, all right. Go ahead.
I listened. Yeah, I think it's behavior. It's attitude. I think there's a little bit of difference. There's a question of leaders. How do I show up? Do I show up with empathy, with an open mind, with curiosity, and so on? So, and these are all choices, I fully agree. There's one observation I would like to share. Empathy is something I believe you can practice and you can learn, because usually we are a little bit born perhaps with different talents in it, and yet you can practice empathy. You can practice strong listening skills. And I do that a lot with leaders, because I start actually with self-empathy. I meet a lot of senior leaders who are, I always say, only out there, only reacting to impulses, trying to keep up with the speed around them, deliver against the expectations, and so on and so on. And what they are missing is sensing what's going on for me. How do I actually feel? Am I doing well, or am I doing less well? And what do I like? What do I not like? And actually, in coaching, I pause them to create some self-empathy. I believe only if you are self-empathetic, you really have the space and the power to be there for others. And I think there is a huge work to be done, actually, with leaders, because they're not used to it. When we do it, they love it because they see how much power there is in it. It's really important, but usually it's not a common practice. Let's say it this way.
Yeah, no, that's true. Sophie, you want to say something?
Yeah, because I think there is something that's possibly slightly missing from there. All the leaders I've spoken to who are really making a difference and making things happen often do work very hard on their technological understanding, because technology can be an accelerator for them, right? But having said that, all those people also work, as Florence said, they work on their human understanding too, right? The empathy piece. So they're working on what's the shortcut, what's the accelerator from technology point of view, but what can I do to know my team, know my customer? You know, all the businesses that move faster are the ones that know their customer. And also the bit of know thyself. So taking time to understand how you work, as well as how technology works, is, as we've said, such an important part of empathy, and allowing yourself the indulgence of taking time to understand yourself will make you a better leader, I think.
So that's a really interesting point, and obviously there's so much here that we agree with and that our research echoes. And actually some of these things are related. So, you know, trust is big. And one of the biggest ways of inspiring trust is to show your vulnerability, because it shows that you're human. Oh, you know, I made a mistake. We're more likely to trust people when they're vulnerable to us. And I think that, building on Sophie's point, she was saying knowing yourself. Well, you know what that is? Self-awareness. I guarantee you all the bad leaders and managers I've worked for lacked it. because they have absolutely they have no idea, and they don't really care about how their behavior is impacting others around them. They just don't care. And without that self-awareness, you cannot be a good leader because you just have no empathy or ability to understand how what you do is impacting those around you. So I think that, that these are all very important aspects of leadership. Helen, you
I
want
just want to give a shout out to someone called Tasha Urich, who is another female author, but an expert in self-awareness. So really, really good book. You don't need to buy the book, you just Google her, she's in articles as well. But if you want to dive into it a bit more, would recommend her as like the go-to guru in that space.
Yeah, no, I think that, that's a great shout out. We say self-confidence and self-awareness are the foundations of being able to develop a good leader. And I do agree with what Florence said, that we know at CMI, you can learn to be a good manager and leader. These are not born things. They're learned things. They're practiced things. And if you want to, you can master them, and you can change. You can choose to change. So, none of this is unattainable for anybody. It can be learned, it can be practiced. These are behaviors, and as Florence was saying, you can help people to learn these behaviors and make a difference. Now, before we move to the audience questions, I did want to just give each of our panelists an opportunity to share with you, their parting words of wisdom. Now, of course, Helen, with her ability to come up with pithy statements, is going to have something extremely impactful. So I'm not going to her first. But I think maybe I'll start with Florence.
Yeah. Be courageous. The world needs more courage. I think what the world needs will not happen in the comfort zone of all of us. And so, be courage, find a partner. I have to do that, Anne. I have to say that P&G has an alumni coaching program where you find partners to, step up whatever you want to step up towards. And we need you being courageous.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sophie?
So the thought for me would be just the fundamental principle of remembering that together we can achieve so much more than alone. So it's one of the principles of Marketing Society. We're a global community of change makers, progressive marketers who help each other do well and do good. It's a principle that's come out here time and again. It is all about you. You've got to do what you need to do, but having what I would call an accountability partner rather than the book bitch, having someone else who can help you there, or other people's perspectives, or just us all helping each other. One of the biggest changes in business has been we've stopped being completely all competitive. We've realised that when we come together, when we have conversations, when we share insights and ideas like we're doing tonight, we can achieve so much more than when we're by ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great sentiment. And Helen?
It's not that pithy, Anna. The pithy pressure's on. My advice is and then the last thing that I'd like to stick is to just ask. Ask for help, ask for opportunities, ask for support and sponsorship. If we just ask, I asked Anne this week, there was an award, and I was like, who can I ask to put me forward for this? I will ask Anne. Now, I could have not asked, and I wouldn't have entered that award. And Anne might have said, sorry, Helen, I don't think you're good enough, or I'm too busy. And that's fine. Everyone has a right to say no, or I can't do it. That's fine, right? But you also have a right to ask. And I think if we just asked a bit more, then...
I did it.
She did, of course she did. She did do it, of course, thank you. But I think if we just asked a bit more, then we would unlock some of the barriers that are getting in our way, whether that's barriers are lack of self-belief, or that there is some kind of, no one has done this before me. Just ask for help, ask for support, ask for opportunities, and you'll certainly get further than if you don't.
And I think you got circles back to your time at P&G where you didn't have the confidence to ask, right?
Yeah.
And you learned now that you can always ask. So my thought is, I'm going to circle back to International Women's Day. And, slogans are great, pithy slogans even better. But I do also recognize that sometimes they can maybe get in the way of what we're trying to do here. And I know that International Women's Day had the phrase embrace equity. And for many of us who've been used to talking about gender equality and, we're like, oh, embrace equity. Huh, what's that? What's it mean? Oh my God, I have to I thought it was equality, now it's equity. Oh, I'm not sure. So you get caught up in the semantics, which is really unfortunate because it takes you away from the nub of the issue. So my parting thought for you all is I'm going to share something that really helped distill the difference to me. So equality, the golden rule. Do unto others, what's the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's equality. I'm going to treat you as I would like to be treated. But equity goes beyond that, and it gets at a lot of these traits, because that is the platinum rule. Again, this is a book. I don't know who wrote it. Somebody wrote it, but you could read it. But the thought is, the platinum rule is, do unto others as they would like to be done unto. In other words, treat others not as you would like to be treated, because that's projecting your values and beliefs. Treat others as they would like to be treated, because then you have to use the empathy and the energy to actually understand what it is that they would like. And that will make you a much better leader, and it's a really good definition for me of what Embrace Equity was about. So that would be the thought I would leave you with. But we're not leaving you just yet. We have time for some audience questions, and I'm not sure what the technology situation is, but
we will read some out.
Super.
Pre-submitted questions. So the first question we'd like to put to you all is, in your opinion, what would you like to see in a male ally in the workplace?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you for whoever asked it. Who would like to answer that first? Sophie, you want to start?
So I was actually tagged on International Women's Day by somebody who'd posted a question as to, it was a bloke who posted a question on LinkedIn saying, should I post on International Women's Day or not? Is it appropriation to comment on it all? And somebody who tagged us had asked a few of us to comment. I would share the word of the evening from Florence, which is, of course, have courage if you are doubting it, because we go back to the point we talked about earlier. Equality is good for everyone. We need everyone's voices. Yes, you may say something that someone else might take offence at, but actually, if you genuinely believe that this is a world that we want to have, we need everybody's voices. So please have courage. Don't be afraid of somebody criticising you, male allies. Please recognise that the pace of change in business has been super fast, and the pace of change when it comes to equality for women at senior leadership roles and people feeling like there is belonging in the workplace is super, super slow, and we all need to do something. So speak up.
Brilliant. What about you, Helen?
I was thinking about, I've had some amazing male allies, like some really, really brilliant men in my career. And I was trying to think, what have they done? Because how could you get more of that? So the men that I've worked with that I would call an ally, I think they have championed my talents more than my titles. So they have basically, they've not gone, oh, she's got that job title, therefore she could do that. They've gone, no, I've seen her do this and this and this, and therefore she could do that. She might not have done it before. Like, so for example, when I went into Microsoft, I'd never worked in technology, didn't know what they were talking about, and I had a kind of this male ally, a guy called Liam, who basically championed me for that role. I mean, I was pregnant when I joined the company. I'd never been in technology. I was going into the techiest bit of the business. But he was like, no, she's got the talents to do it. It doesn't matter about the title. So I think in a company, a male ally champions your talents regardless of your titles. And then I think outside, because I've also got this brilliant guy called Bruce Daisley. I don't know if any podcast listeners, Bruce, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, brilliant podcast. He is one of my sort of male allies outside of work. And he's a real feedback friend. That's what I say he does. He's really honest. We talked about candor, like radical candor. Someone who challenges you directly, but they care personally about you. he is that. And so, like, as an example, when Sarah and I sent him our first TED Talk, and we sent it over WhatsApp, we like recorded it on Zoom, and we sent it to him, and he was like, "You are interesting, this is not." But the thing is, he wants us to do well. He's not being like deliberately difficult. He's like, I believe you can do better than this, and I want you to do better than this, and so I'm gonna push you to do better than this. And I think like that, like the fact that he had the confidence gave us the confidence, and I think there's something in those two men in particular and what they did for me that I think would be good to see more of in organisations.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Florence? What's your male ally?
Beyond personal male allies who were there and who were wonderful, going forward, I would wish for more male allies to really work on structural discrimination, to really go after the more systematic issues why we don't have more women in more leadership positions. And if it's about crossing, really defending the lines of decency and not harassment and all of that, I think that's where I would wish that men would be even more sensitive and speak up. And of course, to change a few, UK is different than Germany, but in both countries, I believe we still have structural issues that make it more difficult for women. And I think male allies should change that, and shouldn't only be the women who ask for good childcare and fairer pension schemes and so on.
Yeah, I think those are all really important points. So a couple of thoughts from me. I think having that personal sponsorship from a senior man makes a huge difference to a woman's career. So we know that sponsorship works, and women are typically over-mentored and under-sponsored. So what male allies will do is they'll find talented young women and sponsor them. I was so fortunate in my P&G career to have such a male ally. He was, I think, the most senior man in the building, and you know, I just happened to wander in on my first day and have a cup of tea with him, and then he took an interest. He invited me in for the cup of tea, but then he took an interest, and then, you know, when I started to do well, he actually publicly sponsored me. You know, oh, this is an amazing job by this person, and of course, that had an enormous impact. And so that sponsorship really matters, and I wish, to Florence's point, that more men would get involved in solving the more systematic barriers. These include that we're not promoting proportionately. So do you know, men, how many women in your team have, first of all, how many women are in your team? And not just women, but people of diverse ethnicity and sexuality and socioeconomic and disability. But do you know? Do you look around the table? Because you can control that. You know, if it isn't a good mix, then you take accountability and you do something about it. So that is what a male ally does. And then you also, the more senior you get, you sponsor, because only 20% of companies and managers that we survey have sponsorship programs for women. That is not enough, because they do work, and men are just much more likely to get sponsored. And then the third thing that male allies do, and I can't emphasize this enough, they call it out. If you see a colleague do something that isn't right, and it doesn't have to be the harassment, it can be an off-the-cuff remark, oh, Joe won't want that job, she's just had a baby. Well, how do you know? Have you asked Joe? Right? You know, just calling that out and challenging those, what they call microaggressions, or those offhand remarks where people, because of perhaps lack of self-awareness, not necessarily malicious intent, just aren't quite up to it. And we need more male allies, because discouraging, I'm going to, not to be a downer, but if you look at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, headed by Julia Gillard, and the research they do on International Women's Day, and CMI's own research, backlash is on the rise. 1 in 3 men think gender equality's gone too far. And the really disturbing, too far. It hasn't gone far enough. And the really disturbing thing is actually younger men, so men 18 to 30, are more likely to think that than older men. And that is something we really have to nip in the bud. So there is a lot of work to do still, and men are essential. So that was an excellent question. What else do we have?
Thank you. So next question is, what advice would you give to female undergraduates in their final year of studies who are considering their career options?
My goodness gracious. Helen, what advice would you give?
I would say get closer to the opportunity. So we make quite a lot of assumptions about like what companies are going to be like because of what they might say or look like on the surface, or what like industries or professions are going to be like. So get closer to it however you can. Go speak to somebody who works in one of those companies. Or I always think it's better to go and speak to someone who's left one of those companies, like, because you get a much more honest view. Like when I went to Virgin, I spoke to somebody who had left that company because I was like, you're going to tell me all the good bits and the bad bits. And so you might need to ask, like, do you know anyone who? Because the likelihood of like a 20-year-old knowing somebody in the certain, they might not have that network, but they might know someone who. So they could ask a lecturer, they could ask a family friend. They could just get on LinkedIn and see, like, what if I just reached out? I mean, if a tightly worded LinkedIn connection goes far. Like if someone says, I'm 20, I'd love to get into marketing, I'm inspired by the career that you've had and the things that you've done, could you spend 20 minutes with me letting me know what a day in the life of a CEO at the Marketing Society is? Someone like Sophie might think, do you know what, I believe in young talent, young female talent. Yes, you've made the effort to personalise this request.
Just ask.
Yeah, just ask. So just ask, but get closer to the opportunity. Don't make too many assumptions about it, because I think that's when you move into it and you're like, oh, this isn't quite the right fit for me. But also, back to the P&G failure point, all of this is just learning. Like your next move is unlikely to be your last one. So just look at it as learning. Even if you go to something, you ask someone, you go to it and you're like, it's still not right for me, your career is not doomed. Okay? It's just learning. And you take that learning and you move on to something else.
Yeah, that's great advice. What do you think, Florence? What advice? Oh, unmute.
Ask yourself a few questions too. So what are my strengths? What is my passion? What am I curious about? And to check then against the opportunities.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And Sophie, what are your thoughts?
So it's very hard for me not to say to everybody, consider marketing as a profession, because I'm very biased in favour of it. But I think, so I've actually written a second book with a partner called Love Work, which fundamentally looks at the fact that work is like relationships. It has to be the right match. It doesn't matter how brilliant an organisation is, if it's not right for you, if you haven't asked yourself those questions, if you haven't matched up with the culture, understand the culture is so important. I went from Procter Gamble to a very similar company. It was a very different culture. So get to understand the culture, get to understand yourself, and work out what the right match is, and recognise it's also like love and relationships. You do need to do some dating. You will discover things over time, and not putting the pressure on yourself to know everything straight away, I guess. And get excited about it. The world of work can be incredible when you find the right match.
Yeah, I agree with all of that advice. And I also think that just remember that, you don't have to get it all right first time. Just, try something. And my advice for young people is always don't stew. Yeah. Because sometimes you get in your own way, right? You get in your own head and you think, oh God, I can't possibly reach out to Helen on LinkedIn and ask her for 20 minutes. But she's just told you can. So if I were the person who asked this question, that's what I'd be doing, right? And you don't stew. Just try it, right? Because whatever it is, you can always change it. It's fine. It's not a life decision. And especially not now, because it is so much more usual now for people to pivot and squiggle, to use Helen's word, the squiggly career. Young people squiggle all the time. That's how they roll. And when in my generation, if you had like 5 or 3 jobs in 10 years, people would be like, oh, they move around a lot. Now you have 3 jobs in 2 years, and it's the norm on CVs. So just don't be afraid. Don't stew would be what I would say.
Thank you. So last question before we hand over to the audience Q&A section. So this person has said, I am the only female leader in our senior leader team. How can I establish myself as a strong, equal part of that senior leadership team?
Who wants to go for that first?
Me, get 3 other women on the team.
Get some
Sorry.
more women on the team is what you said.
Three on a board is what you
Yeah.
need, isn't it?
Get some other women on the team. That's true. You could maybe elaborate on that and say, you know, go to the CEO and say, why am I only the only woman on this team, right? Sophie, what do you think?
I mean, statistically, there's some board research which talks about you only get to a sense of belonging if there are 3 women. It's a number just to make you feel slightly less alone. So it is a serious point. I think, again, going back to recognising you never have to do everything alone and feel alone. Building up your personal boardroom is always a brilliant way to build yourself as a leader. So making sure that you have people like Anne that you can talk to about the challenges that you're facing, reaching out to other people to do it. So one of the interviewees for Superfast is a CEO of a FTSE 100. She's the youngest female CEO of a FTSE 100 company. And one of the things I love that she has in her diary every month is that she has a lunch scheduled in with another CEO of a FTSE 100 every single month. So reaching out and getting perspectives from other people, male and female, I think just helps you get some other perspectives and build up the strength. So build up your personal boardroom and, you know, recognise that you're doing something that is going to help other people as well. Just by being in that role, you know, you're helping shine a light on what's possible.
Yeah, that is an important point. And Helen, what do you think?
I thought the language is really interesting in that question. Like, how can I establish myself as an equal? I'd be like, you already are an equal. Like, I think, first of all, like, there's the framing of it. Like, don't see yourself as an equal. Like, you deserve to have an equal voice there and don't hold yourself back with your thinking. I also think I have been that woman, the youngest and the only female in a leadership team, and it was quite hard. What helped me was like the power of my team. So I might have felt like the power of the men at the table, but I had the power of the team behind me. I had my team who were like, wow, best leader we've ever had, more of her, please. And I had like them all championing me, and they sort of couldn't argue with that. Like they sort of, because I represented something bigger than me. I represented a group of people who wanted to do well and were like, no, everything that this person is doing is we give her more space, please. And so I didn't let my doubts get in the way of my development in that room. And I guess I had the power of the people behind me, which gave me confidence and sort of, they couldn't debate similar, because I was just representing a bigger voice, I suppose.
Yeah,
So
and
I think that's all great advice. Sorry, Florence, did you say something?
yeah, just to really emphasize the topic of focus on your business contribution. That always kept me going. That I was completely convinced that the business needed me and needed my work, and nobody can shut me down.
So it's good that this question is asked, because I did allude to the bumpy part of my career, and that was where I was what you call the one and only. I was the first and the one and the only, and this was, you know, a long time ago, in the early mid-2000s. And it was an extremely uncomfortable place for me. And I did actually get to a point where I felt that the values and behaviors around me were not ones that I agreed with, and so I left. I did leave. I did make my difference in values known, so I spoke up. And my advice to women in this situation today, where it's much more acceptable to speak up, is I would go to the CEO or the senior, the boss of whoever this leadership team is, and just say, you know, in today's world, it is actually very unusual that I am the only female on this leadership team, and it isn't right. And I think there's lots of talent in the organization that we could make room for in this table. I think it would add value, and I think that it sends the wrong message to those further down the organization, because if you don't think, and I bet that organization has 50% women, 50% men at the bottom, and if you don't think the bottom 50% are looking and seeing I'm the only woman on the top, then you're wrong, because believe me, they are, and you're going to lose talent. So how can I help you? How can we help each other to address this? And if they don't address it, and if you do feel othered, and if you do feel bad, vote with your feet, because you have a choice. Back to our definitions of good leader. And that's what I did. I left. And, you know, it was fine. I learned, life went on, and I ended up doing something much more enjoyable where I can make a difference and feel valued. So I would say raise it, but don't sweat it if it doesn't work. Just move on. You still have your values. You still have a choice. So I think now we have, if we have any questions in the audience, we'd be delighted to take them. We have just about 5 more minutes, and we do have some hands up and some microphones.
Hello, I'm Emma. Thank you, first of all, been incredible tonight. I'm really fangirling over all of you. So my question is, on the topic of diversity, when we're encouraging women to step into leadership, how would you encourage women to be women and not just imitate male characteristics to fit in?
Who wants to take that one first?
Sorry. No, it's a great question. So I'll go. I think it's a really good question. I think it's really important because one of the words that came out of that cloud was authenticity. And I do think it's really important to have that human understanding about who you are and be true to who you are in wherever you are. Otherwise, you are doing a disservice to everybody. So if you think about brands and how brands are built, most successful brands are built based on a truth. So something that is true about them, and they don't work if they're not based on true insight and what they're like. So you as a leader should be based on who you are, and that probably will include some gender aspects. Having said that, most brands are presented in the best way possible to appeal to their audiences, to be relevant. And so I think that's why a lot of women in the past have felt that by adopting male characteristics, that would make them feel more like they belonged. I do think that's changed now. And I think the courage of leaders to be themselves and to show who they are is really, really important. So I think that goes back to the bit of know thyself, work out who you are, who you want to be, which strengths and skills you have that you want to share, and make sure that you are being as truthful as possible along with that. And I think it's brilliant to be a woman. I think there's some fantastic things. I think it's also incredibly difficult because we have a history of real challenges. But celebrating, what is good about being a woman in the workplace is also, I think, appealing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Helen?
Mirrors and models, go with me. Mirrors. So another mistake that I made when I was in an organisation and I was the only woman in the leadership team, probably won't name it, but you can look on LinkedIn. I had a coach at the time, and we were having a coaching conversation, I think it was in person, and she was like, how are things going? And I was like, yeah, really great, everything's moving on, everything like's going really, really well. And she was like, stop me mid-conversation. She was like, what's the punching? And I was like, I'm punching. Where's that come from? And I was like, what? And I realised basically I'd started to conform to the culture in a way that wasn't very me. And so I kind of think like, who are your mirrors? Now you can be your own mirror now because you can watch yourself back if you choose to. You can record a meeting and see how you're coming across and think, is that what I want to see? Or someone you trust, you can say like, how am I coming across? And you can compare like that impact with your intent. So I think a little bit of mirror feedback can go a long way. And then I think role models are really useful. But I don't believe that like one person has everything that you might want to model. So I would rather create like a Frankenstein role model where I might take like Anne's kind of like humour. Like Anne's like a funny leader, right? She's so like witty and funny and human. Like so I might take that, and then I might take Florence's courage, and I kind of get like a Frankenstein role model of all the things that I want to be without expecting any one person to have all of it. I'm not trying to be Sophie. I might just I want to borrow a bit of Sophie's brilliance and take a bit over here. So I think like get some kind of mirror to what your impact is today, and is that aligned with your intent? And then sort of create a Frankenstein role model of like what you want to be, and just kind of look at that and think, well, how do I get to be a bit more like that? But you're not trying to copy any one person. You're just trying to be more you, basically. Mm-hmm. So be you, but even better.
Yeah, I know now Florence is going to use probably the courage word again, but what do you think?
No, I would not actually. The interesting thing is who knows what is male behavior and female behavior, and who is interpreting whom. So my question would be for someone where I sense this is not authentic, there is something super complicated building up in, copying someone else, and it may be a gender or a specific leader in the organization. I would have a conversation about what do you want to achieve here and who do you want to be here in that context. Because what might appear to me as a gender-specific behavior might be her total comfort zone. And there's nothing about that person imitating someone, but that's her. I have been told a lot of time, oh, you are so male in specific behaviors. I honestly, partly I believe is I have 4 older brothers. I showed you the picture. There is stuff that is totally natural to me, how I speak with older men. And for some women, I behave very manly in that occasion. I never got that judgment. I just don't, I can't follow it because it's not male or female. That's how I coped with my life as the youngest of 6. So be empathetic with the person where you observe, where you see, perhaps that it's not authentic and perhaps she's making her life too complicated, and have a conversation. And the person chooses.
So it's interesting. I'm going to use some wonderful role models to answer this question. Julia Gillard, I mentioned her earlier. She was talking recently about, that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Well, it's all bunk. So in the intervening years, neuroscience and science has just proven that forget it. That's not right. That the women's and men's brains are the same, and it's all been debunked. And another great example for me, so in other words, don't be afraid to be yourself and be who you are, as you've heard from Sophie, and the mirrors and models of Helen is very important. And the other insight comes from my president. She's my president-elect at the moment, Fiona Dawson. She was chair of the Women's Business Council. She was an extremely successful female leader in Mars, ran one of their global businesses, was on the leadership team. And she said, when I was rising through the ranks, I thought I had to be the alpha, all sharp-shouldered and sharp-suited and sharp-elbowed, and as Helen was, punching. And she said, that was so wrong. Just you do you. There are lots of different leadership styles that will work. And in your word cloud that you put together, I didn't see alpha and domineering and always right and charismatic and all those kind of 90s traits. And so you just embrace who you are, be who you are, and that's fine. That's enough. You are enough. That's what I would say to that. Now I think we are at the end. Thank you all. Thank you those online for sticking with us, if you have stuck with us. And don't forget, you can buy the books. I also have to say, there is a P&G coaching program. Florence is one of the P&G coaches. If you're a P&G alum, and you'd like to get involved, then please do. There are free consultations. And equally, if you would like to donate, the P&G has an alumni foundation, and if you do choose to donate, the wonderful news is that that donation will be matched by the P&G company's Gender Equality Fund. So there's an opportunity. The P&G Foundation helps lots of disadvantaged leaders all over the world to make a difference. And I would like to say a huge thank you to my fabulous panelists. And don't forget, you can always buy the books, or you can read the reviews or the summaries of the books. And also huge thanks to the team, and a thanks to all our audience in the room who now get to stay and enjoy some food and some wine and some more getting to know each other. And to those of you online, have a wonderful evening, if it is evening where you are, and thank you for joining us.